Now, the other thing that's really fun to do is, especially if you're going to do lots of observations that are very close up, is to also look and zoom out to a landscape. So you might want to do a couple of these, and you might just want to do one. So I've given you a nice sort of wintry landscape to start off with. And what I'm going to do is to, first of all, create myself a little border on my page. And again, this can be pre-drawn out should you wish. It doesn't need to be a huge box, but just a small box. And within this, I'm just going to do a little landscapeito, so miniature landscape. And this is what just going to give me a sense of the surroundings, the overall place where I'm walking. And as I said, when you're doing your walks, you can decide how many landscapes you want to include. This is very personal. So if you like doing your little landscapes, maybe there's quite a few interesting ones along your route, you may want to do more. If you're not so into the landscapes, then don't worry about it. It's just an option. And so what I want to do is I've started off with this road. And then I'm just getting a sense of how it curves, how it goes round that corner and disappears. I'm also trying to get a little sense of scale with these fence posts. So I'm just going to make that one a bit taller. So we should have them going back into the distance. And they are nice and dark, so I can play with making that really show up. And then we've got this lovely coppery colored tree. So I'm just going to do a vague little shape, lots and dots of dashes for that. I want to get this larger tree sitting in my box as well. So again, just have a look where there's a trunk, where's the main branches going. So we've got a split there, we've got another split that's slightly lower. Let's get that one in as well. And then I'm going to look further down and go, okay, we've got another rather large branch coming up here. There's some smaller ones. And then I just want to get an overall sense for where that's going. Now, can you see I haven't made my box quite tall enough. Or maybe I made my tree too big. I'm just going to go over the edge. There's no problem there. It's actually quite fun to just draw yourself a box and then work outside the box. No problem. Right. And of course, the other thing that you can do is if you start doing your landscape without drawing your border, you can always draw a border around it at a later point. So there's no hard, fast rules. Just have fun. Get something down on the page. That's the main thing. So I'm just going to do some very small sort of indications of where branches are going. I've got my sort of outside dotted shape. Let's also think about the landscape behind. So where's that? The edge of the field. Where do we want to put a little indication of some of those distant trees and bushes? It's quite a dark one down here. And of course, it's all quite misty, so I don't want to put huge amounts of detail. I want to keep that kind of misty feel. I know lots of people would miss out the telegraph poles and details like that, but again, it's there. It gives you a sense of your place. So we're not completely out in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm going to just suggest those as well. Now what I want to do is just give an indication of tone and a little bit of um, form along the bank. So we want this to look like there is quite a bit of a slope here. So there's going to be shadow, and also the direction of the hatching I'm putting in is just indicating that this is um, a risen up sort of edge, and then maybe I can follow the contour of the bank on the top as well. And I'll do a little bit of the same thing on this side. I'm going to go much more vertical with my lines to start off, and then do a slightly rounded little shape here. And we'll put in some of that grassy foliage on this side too. So you could leave it as a pen or pencil drawing and just have that sort of indicated, or you can start adding a little bit of color should you want to. Again, it's entirely up to you. So if I bring in a little bit of watercolor, I can make myself a little bit of a greeny mix. And then just very quickly pull that in. I don't want to cover it entirely because I want to give the idea that there are little frosty sections, so I could sort of dab out if I get too much green anywhere. I also want it to look quite grey in places, so I'm going to make a little grey from my ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Oops. It's the problem with the water brushes. If you do squeeze them accidentally, they will give you a large splodge of colour. But again, if you've got your little dabbing cloth, then that's not a problem. And of course, the other thing that you can do with your landscape is if you do not want or have the time to put all the colors in, is you can describe. So you can write notes of what you're seeing. And that is often just as good for your nature journal as trying to do a sort of a pretty picture, as it were. So don't feel that you have to get everything exactly as you're seeing it. It is your impression to give yourself a little reminder It's not about creating a perfect watercolor. I'm just going to do a little hint of grey in the sky. It is quite a light coloured sky, but that's just going to give me a little bit more wintry feel. And so I'm going to label in here frost on grass and trees. So combine the words with your landscape, and that will give you a nice sort of setting and reminder about where you are, what you saw. Let's have a little look now at zooming in on some phenomenon you are going to likely see if you are wandering about in the winter time in Britain. So this is our European holly. Everyone feels very Christmassy when they see the holly. And what you want to do here is think, what do I notice about this? What does it make you wonder? What does it remind you of? So we can have a look at doing a observational drawing, combining that with some descriptions as well. So I'm going to look first of all at the form of the leaf and think, okay, what's the main shape here? How many points are we seeing? And it may be different to the symbols of holly that you see. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points along the side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the main point. Now, is it the same on the other side or is it different? Goes a little bit further back. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going around the corner. So I'm just focusing on one leaf. You could, if you wanted to, try and get an overall look. So start on one leaf and sort of continue around. The other thing I want to do is make sure I get some berries in. So I might draw those down here. And of course, if you've got the actual holly plant in front of you, you can look closer. You can move things around. So you can explore things like, how are the berries attached to the stem? Where do they attach? Are they joined together on a small stem, or do they sort of come off of the main stem directly? Where do they sort of sit in terms of the leaf pattern? So is it sort of leaf, berries, leaf, or what's going on there? So there's many things that you can wonder about, you can explore. When it's just a photograph, it's a little bit more tricky to work out what exactly is going on. So don't worry too much about answering those questions right now, but you could note down questions that you want to find out, you want to explore when you go out on your walk. So I might ask, and whenever you've got a question, sometimes you want to highlight that with a question mark. So, how many points on the leaf? Are they the same on each side? And how are the berries and leaves arranged? So nice sort of set of questions. So I'm noticing also there are some interesting vein patterns. And again, these are light, but I'm just going to, as I'm working with pen at the moment, I'm just going to vaguely indicate them with pen very lightly. But again, I can describe that the veins are lighter. So if you come across something which you're not able to, especially when you're outside and you've got limited materials, sort of draw correctly, as it were, then you can describe it by the side. So some things might be quite difficult if you've got sort of something that's got very light veins. It can be done, but if you're sort of on the on the go, you don't want to spend ages outside in the cold trying to get a perfect painting of that. So just write down, and you can always come back to that. Leave a space in your book, and you can come back to that and try and get the actual effect that you're seeing later on. And again, if you don't want to put color into the actual leaf, you can do a little color swatch by side and try and match the color that you're seeing. And of course, depending on where the light is, there's going to be lots and lots of variations of color. So you can also use this to test your color and your mixing. So we've got some areas that are a little bit more bluey green, some areas that have a little bit more yellow in them. And then we've got those really light yellowish veins. So you could do little patches in the leaf without painting the whole thing. You can do little swatches by the side that you then label as to which parts are which. It's entirely up to you. But the thing is that you don't have to do a perfect painting. You don't have to fill everything in if you don't want to. So how red are those berries? They are pretty red, aren't they? So you can also describe how shiny they are. If anything has a texture or sort of a unique kind of marking on it, take notes of that as well. And if you do sort of carry a ruler or a tape measure or something with you, or just use the side of your book, and you can indicate some lengths and some measurements. So you might want to, if you're outside, actually measure some of the leaves, measure the size of the berries. And if you're just using the side of your book, you can do a little marking for the start and the finish of a leaf, which it can be as simple as that. If you want to, when you get home, take a ruler to it and you can find out the exact measurement in centimeters, then that's fine as well. So there's lots of little things that you can do to make things a little bit quicker and easier. Right. Let's move on to our next our next plant. So we've had the holly, now we've got the ivy. And here again, you can think about what's interesting to you. What do you want to note down? I always think it's really interesting how all of the flowers or fruits are in this sort of little bundle shape. So I might first of all think about how I'm going to do a diagram of that. So I might have lots of little spiky stems coming out in different directions. And then almost like an X-ray, put the fruits on the top of that. So this is the arrangement. I might then want to zoom in on one of those. And I could do a view from the side and a view from the top. So from the side, it's going to look a little bit longer, and then the top is a little bit flatter with that little dimple in the middle there. And then we've got the stem coming down. And a few little contour lines as well. Just going to zoom in a little bit more for you. Oops. There we go. Oh, of course, I should have written holly over here, and this is our ivy. If you are trying to identify some of these plants a little bit more, you can use, there's lots of apps that you can use. And of course, you may want to write down the scientific names, or if there's different species, like there's many types of ivy and holly, you can write that down with a little bit more detail as well. So let's have a little look at a sort of top on view. We're going to have something a little bit like this. And then because I've got two pictures at different stages, I might also indicate a change in the color. So I'm going to do a third one. And then have a little think about the colors that I'm seeing. So I'm going to use some of my fancy note into that permanent rose so that I can get slightly red, all reddish brown. Be a teeny bit more red in there. And then this one's going to have a bit more green on the side. And this one is going to be quite blue. Grayish blue. Okay, and then perhaps underneath that you could do it to the side, but I like to overlap things sometimes. I will have a little outline of one of the leaves. And one thing that always fascinates me about ivy is that the veins have their texture underneath. So when you feel, oh, sorry, I've got that wrong way. The veins underneath are smooth. The veins on top have more texture. Normally, when you feel a leaf, the veins underneath are more textured than on the top of the leaf. So the veins underneath are smooth on an ivy, and on top, you can feel them. You can feel the texture. So it's kind of like an opposite way round to most other leaves, which always always fascinates me. Why is that? Why have they got the veiny texture on the top, not underneath? Questions. So again, that again could be something that you want to highlight with a question mark. Why is that? So we're putting in our I wonders as we go along. Okay, so let's see where we're going next. We're going to have a look at some fungi. So in the winter time, you are quite often going to see various different sorts of funguses. This one is a fly agaric mushroom. So this is the pixie or fairy mushroom. I always think of it as. It's the one that's always in the illustrations of fairy tales. It's got a lovely color. So this is why it makes it really pretty to paint or draw. But of course, you don't want to attempt eating it. It's not it's not an edible one, although I apparently red squirrels can eat them. So there you go. Right. So underneath we've got a little skirt. And then go back to the stem. And of course I'm drawing this because I'm drawing it in pen. I'm being a little bit careful. So I'm doing some broken lines. And also that is helpful when you're doing a sort of illustration that you don't want it to look too solid on the outside always. So if you're wanting it to look a little bit more natural, sometimes do a broken line and that is helpful. I'm going to put in a bit of hatching to indicate some of the tone. And also I'm really looking at what kind of textures as well that I'm seeing in this form. So as well as where are the shadows? Where is it sticking out a little bit more? Where is it a little bit rough along the fringe? And if you've got something that has a lot going on, a lot of texture, don't feel pressured that you have to put in everything that you're seeing exactly where it is. So you might, if you've got something like this, where you've got lots of white textured markings, spots, on a surface, you could go, I'm just going to draw this bit. And because you've drawn a small area, it then indicates that it will be across the whole thing. And you can write that, you can make notes to that effect on your page. And again, if you wanted to add color, you could play with putting in a little bit of color. So when you're using watercolor, sometimes if you build up a few different versions of the color, it's helpful to also indicate the light and the shadows. So I'm going to put a little bit of dark murky red from what I've had on my my little mixing palette before down the bottom, so that's giving it a bit of shadow. I'm also going to put a little bit of yellow at the top underneath this area, and then I'll just take a little bit of that off my brush and again mix it a little bit with some of the muddy colors that I've got left, and then use some of that into the stalk area as well, just to give it a slight bit of tone and okay some of the color there. Okay, let's just clean that up. And then I can come in with some more fresh red. So I have permanent rose and I have transparent orange in this set. So if I mix those together, I'm going to get a nice sort of bright red. And again, I can use that. I can come in between those white areas. If I wanted to add the white afterwards, then of course I could use a white pen and or even some gouache over the top. So in fact, I will just place some red over this side as well. But where I have drawn the white markings already, I will just carefully work between those and add the red. With watercolor, sometimes you will need several layers to get the intensity of the color that you want. And so it may be something where you want to do a little color swatch that is a little bit more intense by the side so that you can note which color you're aiming for, and then in your actual painting you can come back over it a few times. Of course, when it is cold in the winter time or sort of very humid, then it's going to take much longer to dry. So do bear that in mind. Okay, so this is our fly carrot. So let's have a look next at another type of mushroom or fungus and explore what's going on here. So these ones are a type of bracket fungi. And so what I want to do here is, first of all, this is actually my photograph, so I know where they were. But they were on an old piece of rotting wood. So I might write that information down. And then I'm just going to very quickly do a rough sketch of how they are arranged. And then I'll come back and do a little bit more detail on that single shape. And again, if you can't draw it or you don't have the time, describe it. So how would you describe how these are arranged? I think I would sort of say they're a little bit like steps or floating shelves. If you can think of any other descriptions, what does it remind you of? So I'm going to do shorthand. It reminds me of steps, floating shelves, anything else you can think of. And also, what am I noticing? I notice uh, we've got the lighter side underneath. And then I'm going to come in and have a look at this single shape. So we've got a lovely rounded shape. And again, what does it remind you of? What are you noticing about this as you're drawing it? So this one really reminds me of an oyster. You know that oyster shell shape? It's very much making me think of that. So I can do another. It reminds me of oyster shell. And the other thing I notice that it seems to have rings of different colors. So I'm wondering if those rings show the stages of growth. So that might be a bit like a tree rings. It could be completely different. I don't actually know. So these are my thoughts as I'm drawing. And of course, you don't have to answer all of the questions that you come up with in your journal, but they could be things that you want to go away and research. You don't have to though. So it can just be a I wonder that you don't answer yet or maybe never. Again, if you want to put some color in, you can add a little bit of color. If you don't worry. I'm going to take just a slightly smaller pen and put some of the smaller sort of radiating out lines or patterns that I'm seeing on the edge in there. I'm also just going to darken up the edge of this section. It seems to be a little bit raised up, so there's a slight shadow underneath. Okay, and then you can write any other thoughts, any other things that you notice or you're wondering about these fungi onto your page. So if you're coming up with other questions, other things, write it all down. That's absolutely fine. Okay. We're going next to another element you may find in the wintertime. So we're looking at lichen. And again, this is a very interesting so the thing to find, again, it's in the fungi family. So there are many types of lichen. They are very difficult to identify, but of course you can use apps and things like iNaturalist online to help you get an idea of the types of lichen that you're possibly seeing. So how do you go about putting something as complicated as this into your journal? Well, again, you don't have to draw it exactly. You can have a little think about ways of simplifying, ways of just focusing in on one section. And what I might do is use a light gray marker pen and just get an idea of the overall kind of shape. So I'm just going to do a few lines. Where is the outer sections? Where are the outer parts that I'm seeing? How far does it go out in each direction? And then once I have that, I might just think about where can I see one strand and then follow it along to an end and then come back and think, okay, where did it break or branch away into some separate strands and areas and follow those. I can do the same thing. I can come back up and follow another strand, come back up and follow another sort of larger strand. And then I'm just going to add a hint that there is more going on underneath those main ones using a slightly thinner line. So I'm using a chisel tipped pen. It means that I can get a thicker line or a thinner line depending on which angle I'm holding it at. So this will allow me to sort of fill in very quickly an indication that there's a lot more going on underneath. I can do dots and dashes as well. I don't have to stick to just lines. Okay, and then I might, if I wanted to sort of define one little part, I could come back in with my pen. Could use pencil if you prefer, or even color. And just define one of those sort of main strands that you drew in. So you don't have to do the whole of it, but you can zoom in on one part and think about how you're showing that shape in just a small section. So again, if you look really closely, you may sort of find that there are more interesting elements on the end. So some of these lichens have almost like a sort of sucker end to them. Some of them, I think this one is probably a little more like a sort of branchy, sort of fine end. Have a zoom in really close look at what's going on, not just at the structure, but also the texture of the lichen that you're seeing. And again, you could make further notes about where you're finding it. So what is it sitting on? This one's on a branch. So this was actually growing on a tree. A living tree, that is. And if you are able, you could also identify the type of tree. I actually can't remember, and from this little bit of photograph, I can't tell. So if you again, if you know, if you can identify it, it might be worth putting in that information, because that could give you a clue as the type of lichen that you're seeing, depending on the species of the tree that it's growing on. Right. So another interesting thing with this is looking at the color. A lot of lichens have very interesting colors. You can get very golden yellow ones. You can get ones that are kind of bluish gray, like this one. You can get all sorts. So make a note of the types of color that you're seeing as well. That again, if you don't have color media with you, you can try and describe it. You can also think about the size that you're seeing. So you might want to get a measurement of the overall sort of, let's say, bundle of lichen that you're seeing. You could put in some sort of area of coverage. So if you were looking at a branch, you could estimate how much of that branch is covered by one type of lichen or another. So it could be that you're putting in, there's lichen sort of in here and here and here. And again, you could color code it for different species. Where do they overlap? What's going on with this one tree branch and how many types of lichen you're finding on it? So there's lots of things that you can have a think about doing. So I might say, right, there was sort of golden lichen in here, and then we've got sort of the branchy bluish gray lichen here and here. I mean, I'm making it up. I'm just making it up at the moment, but this is things that you can go out and observe. And I'm just sort of giving you suggestions, giving you tools of things that you might want to note down, that you might think about in a little bit more detail. How can you get the information into your journal? What's interesting to you? So this could be the coverage of lichen on one branch. And we're looking at different species. Okay. And moving on from her lichen is the other thing you may find lots of is moss. And so this is a type of moss, again, growing on a branch, on a tree. So I'm just trying to work out how I pronounce it again. Orthorhyaceae. I'm going to say that and hope it's somewhere near right. Um, so again, moss is something that's quite difficult to identify, but you generally will be able to identify the family it belongs to at least. The closer up you can photograph it, if you do want to get an idea, then the better. But again, we can jot down the shapes and the structure in a nature journal. So this has a almost sort of star shaped pattern. And then the layer underneath continues. And it goes down and down down. So again, I've done my zoom in version first. I might want to zoom out and have a think about that whole sort of ball of moss that's just hanging there. What's the shape of it? How is it attached to that branch? And again, I'm doing my little dotty outline to get the main shape. And I might just indicate some of those smaller shapes, a little bit at the edges, a little bit in the middle where they're more prominent. You don't have to put in huge amounts of detail, but it's a good idea to do sort of a zoomed in version as well as an overall version so that you can concentrate on one small area and what is happening there. And if it repeats again and again and again, you've got the idea that all of these very scribbly lines are the same as this one. And again, you can note down a little bit of the color that you're seeing. And maybe use some descriptions as well. So, what does it feel like? What's the texture like? Wet and soft, spongy. I'm going to write vibrant green. Yeah, make as many descriptions. You can put it in a list as you want. You can put that into a sentence if you prefer. It's entirely up to you how you want to go about putting in your observations and your descriptions in a way that suits you. Okay, so we've explored some Some of our landscape and the plant and fungi and lichen life around that we can zoom into a lot closer as well. Using lots of descriptions, lots of I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of kinds of observations, and thinking about bringing in a little bit of color, a little bit of texture as well. And this is where we're going to need our black or colored paper, is to actually look at snow or frost and how you may want to record that. So one thing that you can do is, if it is snowing, you can go outside and take a black bit of paper, or if your sketchbook has a black cover, you could use that, and just let some snowflakes fall onto that surface. When they're on that dark surface, then you'll be able to see them a little bit more clearly, and you can have a go at trying to draw them. Now, to make it easier for you, I've got a really good close-up on screen. If you are wanting to do this with actual snow, you may want to take a magnifying glass with you. So what I'm going to do here is just first of all start with white pencil and get an idea of the overall shape and structure that I'm seeing. So how many arms, for want of a better word, does my snowflake have? And have a little think about the shapes that you're seeing. Are you seeing hexagons, pentagons? What's going on? And this is where you can really go into as much detail as you want to. Because this is a photograph, our snowflake's not going to melt. But if you were doing this from life, then you may have to work a bit more quickly. So I want to think about the shapes that I'm seeing. And when I've got the shapes in, I'm then going to think about where I can see the lightest bits of reflection, and where is it a little bit more see-through, so that I'm seeing more of the background color through the snowflake. And that's where it will hopefully start to look a little bit more like a transparent sort of glassy, icy structure. So I can come back in and go, okay, I'm going to put a little bit more white in here, a little bit more white in here, and then choose areas where I'm going to leave the black. If you take your time with this, again, if you're watching the recording, you can pause the recording and really focus in on these small shapes, and it can get sort of quite meditative, just focusing in on the light and dark shapes. Put in as much detail as you want to, and just explore what's going on. It's really fascinating how such intricate shapes and structures just forming, and they're all unique. Okay, so hopefully you have enjoyed just taking a moment to really appreciate some of those patterns. Where on the photograph it's not very clear, we've got more snow in front. I'm actually just going to keep that effect by shading in a little bit of a foreground blurry snow. And of course you can add to that effect. So if you wanted to um, really highlight some of those white areas, you could also use a combination of pen with your white pencil so that you can get some really, really strong highlights onto some of those shapes, some of those areas where the light is being really picked up more strongly. And I think that's just sort of building up gradually, thinking, okay, where do I want the brightest highlights to be? And so that is one way that you might want to explore, putting in some indications of snowflakes that you're finding. The top image, we've got some very interesting frost, little mini icicles almost, on a leaf. And again, if you wanted to make notes of things like that, or even frost on spiders' webs, if you work on a dark colored background, it's going to give you the best opportunity for drawing those white or sort of slightly sort of see-through white um, elements that you get with ice, frost, and snow. So have a think about including some either black or dark colored paper into your journal so that you have the opportunity to draw with white. And it does make trying to capture those kinds of elements much, much easier. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed our nature journaling session tonight. And next time will be our January session where we're possibly going to be thinking about phonology wheels and how to go about putting those into your journal for the new year. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye for now.